Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Hollywood Breaks. This week I'm joined with our special guest co-host, Robin Geisen. And this week we tackle more on the entertainment strategy guys' view on the American Viewer, my favorite series pretty much ever. And we'll discuss Robin's opinion on it, and we'll also dive into this week's box office. So welcome to this episode of Hollywood Breaks. Robin, so good to see you. Thank you for coming back on and enjoying this crazy little show. It's always a pleasure.
Are you kidding? It's so good here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Always glad to have you. And considering Tim's off cavorting, doing God knows what, it's nice to have someone who's actually somewhat sane to talk things over with. So
well, good for him. Good for him.
Yeah, I guess he needs a break every now and then. I'll give him that. Well, listen, Gig, thanks again for coming on. This is great. Always good to see you. So I want to dive in first, starting right off, because as I'm sure you know from reading the newsletter as well as listening to the podcast, I'm obsessed with the Entertainment Strategy Guys' latest series on the American Viewer. I've been talking about it for like the last 2 weeks, and I'm really curious because Tim and I talked a lot about it last week, kind of dived in, sort of got our perspective. And you being the strategy guru that I know you to be, I'm just curious, like, what are your sort of initial thoughts on the series itself?
I mean, I think it's brilliant. I think he touches on a lot of things that have been kind of taboo to say, that nobody really wants to talk about, but he says it in a very objective, he has a very objective point of view, which is really how we need to be approaching this. If we actually want to fix what's happening in Hollywood and all the disconnects and everything that is going on, and there's a lot going on. But I think he talks about a lot of things where there's actually a lot of opportunity if you read between the lines and you see what he's discussing. And look, I think there's a hopeful way to look at it. And, the book of history has no final chapter, right? So I think it's a really hopeful way to look at our industry and come into it with new ideas. And there's a lot of new ideas that he has in there that he's talking about when he talks about the American audience and like what's the low-hanging fruit? Like everything from, I mean, my biggest takeaway, and this is what I've been saying for years, and I think I've said it probably on every time I've come onto your show, I think I've said it, is like, know who your audience is, and your relationship with your audience or your consumer is your most important currency. And Hollywood has forgotten that. And so have exhibitors, right? And so I think that everybody just needs to take a step back. And if you actually read between the lines on everything he's saying, that's exactly what he's saying. You have had a complete disconnect with who your audience is for each and every movie. And people just want to be entertained. That's why they go to the movies.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I think that really kind of brought it out to me, as he put the focus on the audience itself. I mean, obviously the series is called The American Viewer, so it's very, very focused on the audience, but it's oftentimes that we ignore a lot of that. It's something that's sort of like an afterthought. I want to go back a little bit and pick on some of just highlight something you mentioned. You said there's a lot of things that he mentioned that are quote unquote taboo. What exactly would you say that what he talks about that's a little bit more taboo and that, sometimes Hollywood just avoids discussing?
Well, Hollywood is making movies for themselves right now. They're not making movies for the audience. And that's the number one thing that I think is taboo. Nobody wants to hear that when they go into these meetings with people. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't make those movies either. What I'm saying is there is a time and a place. I think Hollywood in general should make whatever they're inspired to make. However, I don't think that every single one of those movies should go to theatrical, because it's a very different landscape that we live in today. And so make whatever you want to make, but let's make it for the right price. Which is also taboo to talk about, because, once you have so many people from all different angles coming into this project, the prices get higher and higher, whether it's, paying for the filmmaker, paying for the talent, like or, special effects or whatever it is that the movie requires. Let's take a step back and go, well, who's the audience? We have enough data now to tell us, to at least let us build some comps of what this could be in the end. And marketing needs to be part of those conversations earlier on. And it's easier said than done. Like, we think that they are, but they're actually really not all the time. Like, when you see things, you're like, how did this get greenlit? Why on earth would they spend this amount of money on pay this talent that amount of money when we know that, comedies this comedy is not going to open north of $20 million, but you're going to pay this $150 million to come. Like, what? Why would you do that? But it's happening. It's happening all the time. And we're setting our own projects up for failure. So that's the biggest thing that I talk about with taboo. And the other one is things like, there's just a disconnect with the American audience in terms of, there's a reason why they're not watching anymore. And even things with like award shows, they're not watching award shows because you're not honoring or highlighting the movies that they're watching. So why do they care? They don't know who anybody is. They haven't seen those movies yet. They don't, if you want them to watch, then you need to nominate the movies that they are actually watching, that they're actually, look, Yellowstone is a perfect example with the Emmys this year. Where was it? Why was that not nominated? And it's not like, the acting's tremendous. There was a disconnect, right? And it's like, that's a perfect example of what America is doing and what Hollywood thinks America should be doing. And we can't forget, like, again, your consumer is your most important currency, and they've forgotten that.
It's interesting you bring up marketing, and it's always funny because you always read about how marketing has a seat at the table. And when I first started a New Line, we were very heavily involved in sort of like I think most studios do this now, but it's a P&L process where you basically go through a high, middle, low case in terms of, the high is we're going to make a crap load of money. Medium, we're going to make a little money. Low is we're going to break even or lose money. And they usually would go to marketing and say, well, how much do you think this movie's going to make? And it's like, it seems to me there needs to be more of a conversation. I remember vividly when I was at Fox, because it only happened once. Mark Weinstock comes into a creative meeting. We had our creative meetings on Tuesdays, and he comes in and I'm not going to mention the movie, but he kind of goes through, he says, okay, Jim came to me with this movie idea that they're thinking about making. So the creative meeting is all the creative. So it's all, all the guys who cut the trailers, TV spots, we occasionally have one or two digital people in there. And he pitched us the movie, and it was unanimous. No, because no one could see a good way to cut a trailer. No one could think of a way to sell that movie in a way that's going to convince people to go. And ultimately, the movie did not work. It went to another studio and it didn't work. So we were all like high-fiving each other. But that really only happened once in my entire career. Most of the time, I was either given a script after it was greenlit, and it was sort of like, make this movie. And then you start seeing the takes and the dailies, and you're like, oh Jesus, this is going to be a major upload. I always felt like at times at Fox we were always fixing the movie's problems. Like, development was like, okay, we screwed up, this isn't a great movie, you guys fix it, figure it out. And for a while, that was Tony Sella's dream. That was his magic sauce, was be able to take a movie that wasn't terribly great and cut something that would make it seem like it was much better than it really was. And for a while it worked, and then the audience got savvy to it, and it's like, okay, Fox always, cuts these really great trailers for really bad movies. But it's interesting, you always talk about it, and it's just something that just keeps perking up into my head. It's like, because in marketing, we are constantly thinking about the audience, constantly thinking about the consumer, constantly talking about what can we do, constantly looking at testing, looking at the data, telling us what works, what doesn't work. But it doesn't seem like really anyone else necessarily in the studio world, or even, I know we're talking movies, but we could talk about TV shows too. It doesn't really feel like the audience is ever front and center. It's always sort of an afterthought.
Well, they used to be front and center. And that's where I think, like, we've lost sight of that a little bit. And look, every business, every business and every industry goes through something like this. And especially when there's disruption, that comes along, like, big technology disruption, which has happened for years and years and years. That's not anything new, right? Like, this is just the one that we happen to be dealing with now as we're moving into the streaming age and yada, yada, yada. However, it's how you, this is where you take a step back and you go back to look at, like, what was your primary dimension of merit as a business, and come back to that. And how do you change your strategy to now fulfill that primary dimension of merit? Like, I look at Kodak. This is an old case study, right? Kodak is a perfect example of, and I think this is like the primary business school, case study that everybody looks at.
Someone's taking B school classes.
Yeah. Wonder thing. But no, it's true. Primary case where everybody looks at it. Yeah, it's top of mind, right?
Yeah.
It's for a reason. And you have the primary dimension of merit for Kodak was to take sharp quality pictures, right?
Yeah.
And digital imaging came along. And actually, if I took you, for example, and I put a picture that was taken from a Kodak camera and a picture that was taken from my cell phone, and said, it didn't tell you anything else other than just showing you the two pictures, and said, oh, which picture would you want, which device do you want to take pictures? You would automatically choose the Kodak picture because it's sharper, it's higher quality, it's better. But at some point, like, it becomes good enough, right? And that's kind of how I'm seeing streaming and theatrical. Streaming is not better than theatrical. The theatrical experience is still better. It's still a better experience. Like, what you get on a big screen is still going to always be better than what you get on your iPad or on your cell phone, right? But at some point, it's good enough. And it's not better than, it's different. And that's where I think we need to take a step back then and start to see stuff. I think what was really interesting was then I saw Apple Quick Take came in later on and needed a technology, and they licensed Kodak. They licensed Kodak. So now Kodak under the guise, they said, we'll give you this technology that we have, but under no circumstance can you mention Kodak anywhere in this, because after all, our primary dimension of merit is, taking sharp quality pictures. Your digital imaging is inferior to our photos. Right. But they're now a licensing company. They've survived and they're doing it in other ways. So I think that's how we need to think about this, and very smart. It's exactly what IMAX just did. IMAX just bought SimsWave, right? Yeah. And they've gone from, we're not a distributor, which they've never really been a distributor, but they have positioned themselves as like, we love exhibitors. We're in, right. We love this, but now look where they're going. We're a technology licensing company. Yeah. Like, it's smart. They're right. They are. And now they've bought this technology enhancement company that is going to allow them to perhaps take their IMAX technology to our cell phones, right? Which genius. Yeah. So you're right. There's opportunities in all of this. Like, that's where I was saying, like, the book of history has no ending, and that's really exciting for us. But you're going to get crushed and you're going to become irrelevant if you don't go back to who you were as exhibitors, as AMC, and also as a studio. Go back to who you were. What were the movies that you made and why? And again, I don't think the filmmakers, I think that they should still make whatever they're inspired to make. But I think we have to I think there's a path for them to make whatever they want, but not every single movie should go to theatrical, and not every single movie should even go to Apple or stream. Like, there's a different home for it, and let's be smart. And let's find where they can best thrive and how much money is the right amount of money to spend to make this so that your movie is successful, right? Yeah. And so there's so many facets that go into it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's a part of me that agrees. Like, I would I would say with the idea of the filmmaker can go make whatever they want, but then at times you ignore the audience when you start from that rubric. And I think it's always important to keep the audience in perspective, especially with the studios. Now, you talk a lot about this, we've been through this before. The book of history has no end. I often go back to that time when Jim G took over the studio at Fox. He did that big presentation. He threw up all these headlines that we'd been hearing all the time, and then he showed like the dates of them. So our death has been long, forecasted. But I think the big difference between those times when he was referencing like articles when TV first came out, and then VHS, and it was no one's going to go to the movies anymore. There was still a sort of connect between the people who were making movies and the audience, right? Yeah. They were still movies that people loved. They were still making movies that were nominated for Oscars, that were blockbusters and big hits. And then that slowly has started to diverge, as we were just talking about. And I think that's the unique challenge that we're dealing with today. And, it's interesting because obviously when, as I said to you, and I've been saying ad nauseum, I thought the series was great, and it kind of lifted me up a little bit because he was saying things that, you and I, of course, have been talking about for years in our little conversations on the third floor of 88, rest in peace. But it's like, and he had data to back it up. That was like the most exciting thing, because you sit there and you speculate on, this is what we should be doing. But of course, at the time, it's just your personal opinion and your basis of what's happening in the industry. And now you actually have data to back up what you've been saying to your blue in the face. And I was optimistic. I really was. And then you start seeing things like, and this is, subject of this week's Founders Brew, for those of you who are not subscribers, you should subscribe. About, there were two instances in particular, and Matt Bellani's, what I'm hearing from last Sunday, that sort of really just brought home how much further we have to go. And those two instances were, one, the Academy had this big meeting about how we're going to fix the Oscars and how we're going to fix all our problems. And none of the members could be bothered to attend. This is an organization whose sole purpose is to sustain the industry and celebrate entertainment and the beauty of telling stories in the big screen in the theater. And nobody could be bothered. Nobody cared. I don't really. And they were literally comments like, I don't care. I got my kids signed. Oh, not my problem. So that's one. And then the second one was, he had last week, Matt Bellani wrote about Apple TV Plus. And he essentially said, if it went away, or Apple TV Plus said, we're not doing this anymore, no one would be particularly shocked. No one would be like, oh, I can't believe Apple's pulling out. Like, no one would be like jaw on the floor. Well, a producer responded and said, why would you even suggest getting rid of Apple TV Plus, which, as I just mentioned, wasn't what he was suggesting. But he said, like, they've thrown millions of dollars in this economy, and they made my show, and it's great. Who cares who's watching? I mean, therein lies so to me, it's almost like there's sort of a roadmap that we've been presented from Entertainment Strategy. He's done the yeoman's work of diving in deep to and this is all available research. It's not like he's got some sort of like Svengali on the side who's feeding him all this information that nobody else has. He doesn't have his own personal Yoda. It's just like he literally went and gathered it all together and said, here guys, this is what you should be doing. And I mean, even the part 5 was like, here is the recommendations to spell it out for you guys who have sometimes be a little thick. But now I realize that we've got a long road to hoe simply, by using the two examples that I gave you. So,
well, I mean, look, I think, so that's an example of, again, I'm not saying, I still think he should go make those movies, but the disconnect is, why are we spending all this money because we're expecting a giant audience to watch his movie, right? Yeah. Like, let's on the other side of the business of the people who are reciprocal of what he's giving them to deliver to audiences need to have the balls, excuse me, but they have to have the balls, like a Zaslav now, who's saying, we're not going to send that to theatrical now, right? Like, we're not going to do that. This is going here, this is going there, whatever. Like, we need to have those real conversations so he can make that movie and he can have that disconnect with his audience, and he's going to say, who cares who's watching? And then we'll say, okay, well, nobody's really watching your show, so this is the amount of money that we're going to give you to make it, if you still want to make it. And we know, because someone's watching it, right? Everything has an audience, even if it's this big, and that's okay. That's okay. Just spend the right amount of money to set it up for success for that little audience, right? Like that's where.
But no filmmaker wants to hear that their audience is little. They want it to be as big as it's humanly possible.
Well,
right?
but there's a reality, and that's where the people need to come in, and these are hard conversations to have, but there's also diplomatic ways to have them. And that's how you say, like, look, I'm not saying you can't make this movie. I'm saying, let's take the path that sets you up for the most success. And everything that comes after that, wonderful, icing on the cake. But this is how, there's a path. This is the path. And that's what we need to be saying. That's what we need to be having. Instead of doing whatever they ask to do, when we know that their audience is this big, we know that people aren't going to care about that movie, but like there's a small amount of people who will care about that movie, and that's great. That's good. Let's make it for them, but let's not put it on 4,000 screens and give it an IMAX release and whatever. Like there are conversations to be had, right? And so that's where it's just
yeah, but you know what I would say, I agree. You're right. I mean, I think there's a lot of tough conversations to have, but let's take Batgirl, for example, right?
Take what?
Batgirl. You brought up Zaslav, which is, so far as I can tell, he's on a very steep learning curve. He's made some very smart moves. And so let's talk about Batgirl. So $90 million movie that was built under the previous Jason Kilar regime as direct to HBO Max, right?
Mm-hmm.
From what I heard, a lot of work needed to go into movies. So and with COVID restrictions and all the policies, that the budget had already ballooned to 100 million, and they were going to probably have to spend another 50 to make it better, to make it feel like a movie and not just a CW movie of the week kind of thing.
Okay.
So he totally junks it, right? Says, we're not doing this. This is not the quality we want. No one's ever going to see it, ever. We're not putting it on streaming. We're not releasing it theatrical. It's going in the vault. We're taking a tax write-off.
Yeah.
The town freaked the bleep out. Like everyone was like, oh, I can't believe he's doing all those people who work so hard. And yes, I totally understand. There are people who worked really hard on that movie that are very disappointed. If I had worked hard on a movie and it got shelved, I would be upset, no doubt. But at the same time, it's like, it is a business. So, but do you feel like, I just don't think there are enough people that are I mean, listen, you and I have sat in enough of those meetings where we're all banging we all know the movie's going to tank. We all know it. You and I know it. American people know it. Everybody knows it. The movie's going to the bomb. And we're all sitting there blowing smoke up this filmmaker's ass because he's just a filmmaker and everybody wants to be in business with him. But nobody has the stones to say, dude, this is not going to work. It's going to fail. We can't release this movie. And I don't know if enough of those people exist. I agree with you. Those are the conversations that need to be had. Kevin Getz was on here a few weeks ago, and he literally said, like, we have all this data. Like, let's figure out what the right number is so you guys aren't like, right, even before the movie releases, you're already in the red. Like, there's ways to do it, but it's all well and good, but I don't know if there are people that are willing to have those conversations. I really don't.
Well,
tell me I'm wrong.
No, look, ideally you have those conversations before it gets to where Batgirl got, right? Like that's really bad on all accounts. Like, there was obviously a disconnect between what the filmmakers wanted and what the studio wanted. And by the way, those filmmakers are awesome. They did Bad Boys for Life. Like, they're awesome filmmakers. They've had success at the box office before, and they're super creative. And so I feel for them. But obviously there was a disconnect between what they thought they were delivering and what the studio thought they were delivering, and whatever, but again, that's bad on everyone for not having those conversations early enough. Like, ideally, we're not sitting in a room saying, this is going to stink, this is going to fail, whatever. Like, I actually sit in the room and still, until, even through the weekend of release, I'm thinking, what is our Hail Mary? Hail Mary, Hail Mary. What's a Hail Mary? Because there is always something that you can still do to make it better. And I think those are, that's the kind of stuff that I'm trying to do, even if it's not in a good place. But Hail Marys, and this is the other thing, that this is a disconnect, doesn't mean spending more money. It doesn't have to mean that, right? Like, just because you put, like, this is what I always say, like, you buy the YouTube masthead, or you spend, a tremendous amount of money to put your spot in a Super Bowl spot to be seen by 80 million people. But if your creative is bad, then you're giving 80 million people a reason to opt out, right? So it's about the creative, period. It is about the creative and the connection that it has to an audience, right? To its audience. And what are also some other fun ideas, whether they're publicity stunts or whatever, creative stunts, something that grasps the attention of an audience. And so those are the meetings that we should be having. And ideally, it should never get to the point that it got, like, that's just unacceptable. And like, that's unacceptable, because and that's why it doesn't happen all that often. I mean, tell me another movie that's happened on recently, like, where they shelve it, never to be seen again.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we've also had a transition. To be fair, we had a tradition take over, a change in regimes, a change in strategy. But at the same time, maybe it is something that needs to be said more. Maybe it does need to happen more. Maybe we've seen movies that are just absolute dreck that
happen before the movie is made.
Okay, that's fair. I will give you that.
Conversations again. That's what I'm saying. What is the path to make this movie? What's the right path? Let's not spend $80 million on a movie that we know is never going to open north of 10 or whatever. Right? Like, what are you doing? $10. What are you doing? Why would you do that? We know this already. We have this information, and so these are the things, and you don't need to spend all that money sometimes. There's so many reasons. There's also so many fights where there's like filmmakers who fight for one thing and studios are fighting for another. And this is where everybody wants what's best for the movie. Everybody wants the best possible result. They just have different ways of getting there and ideas of what is best for the movie. And so, and we have to have those conversations.
I don't know if I agree with you that everybody always wants what's best for the movie, but most people do.
I do.
Most people. I do. Oh, I know that I do too, but there's also a lot of ego involved. So, come on, let's be honest.
Let's say this, let's rephrase this. Everybody wants what's best for themselves, right? Yes. But what's best for the movie is what's best for everyone involved.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that is what everyone should come back to, because when you do what's best for the movie, you are doing what's best for the studio. You are doing what's best by the filmmakers, by the talent agents, by every single person who's involved. That is what we should be doing.
Yeah. Well, I think we should just take this episode, right? We should send it, we should package it, and we should send it to, let's see, we sent to Brian Roberts, David Zaslav,
Robin.
Let's see, Brian, the chairman of Paramount, whose name's escaping me, Bob Bakish, and just say, hey, Rob and I are available if you ever need a new studio heads. We're here.
Oh,
we'll have those tough conversations.
Believe me, they know this. They know this. It's just easier said than done, right? Like when you have so many people involved and so many different agendas, then that's where it becomes messy and gray. They know this. It's just easier said than done.
Right. But I think it's time we start saying it and doing more. Do or do not. There is no try. Right.
Oh, all right, Yoda. All right.
Yeah, that's right. Speaking of Yoda. All right. Well, we're running out of time here. We got about a couple minutes left. Okay. Man, time flies when you're having fun, right? So let's talk real quick about the box office. Don't worry, darling. What's your over under? What do you think? I mean, given all the press, although I would argue there's no such thing as bad publicity, particularly with this movie, because a lot of it's been in the negative side, but that may end up turning in its favor. What do you think we're looking at? Tracking
Yeah.
says about 20, I think, is what I last read. So what you thinking, the over or under on that?
I'm going the over on that. I mean, look, they had IMAX screenings earlier in the week, so they're rolling those sales into this. So, and that was successful.
As you do.
What I read. You know, look, I think that from what I'm seeing, the audience is actually receiving it better than the critics. Like they, you know, I think this is a prime example of too many cooks in the kitchen, and you're seeing it in campaign. You're seeing the studio working against all these other
what the
odds.
filmmaker wants. Yep.
Right. You're seeing a lot of, I mean, Venice was never the right place for it. Never should have taken it there, ever. I don't know why it went to Venice. This is a movie where less is more on this campaign, I think. And especially when you've got that kind of mystery surrounding it and you see it, and the creative's great. The creative is super fun and interesting, but the creative's been working against the publicity campaign for months. And so it's really interesting to see. But like, look, I think, and you know, she just has the spotlight on her just by function of her and Harry and all this. So I feel for her for that too. But because it has nothing to do with the movie. Right. And but I do think, I mean, that's going to follow you regardless of wherever you are, but I think it's actually helping her in the movie. Look, she was at his concert last night. I saw pictures and videos of her dancing. Like that's going to help her box office this weekend, right? Like don't think for a second that that's not something that's going to be pushed out to help, because people want to root for something like that. Like she's going to be fine. The movie's in, there's not a lot of competition. It's in over 4,000 locations. There's, what is it, Avatar re-release, which they've added footage to, which was smart for the new movie. So I think
and there's apparently sequences of Way of Water too. So that'll goose people to,
that's what I mean. They've added footage, they added footage for the new movie. I mean, which was smart. Although I didn't see that marketed wide. I just saw the movie marketed wide, so I don't know how many people like moviegoers.
I saw it briefly discussed on Twitter, but that it's not really wide. I don't really hear a lot of people talking about it. So, I mean, it's unfortunate, but you know, I mean, I don't know if I want to go see it because it might give me PTSD from that campaign. But anyway. Well, all right. So
Darling, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna open.
I think it's gonna be open. I'm taking the over on the 20. I think 20 was tracking. I think it's gonna probably be I might break into 30s, maybe mid 30s, maybe. We'll see.
Oh, I don't know if I'll go that high. I mean, you never know. Look,
you never know. It could be. I'm gonna be curious to see what the cinema score is on Saturday morning, to see like how, you know, because you get the diehards out there, and if they're like A+++, then the word of mouth is going to be phenomenal. So it could have a good weekend. So we'll see.
And Woman King is going to have a great hold. I think that might take a little bit a chunk out of them, but you know that, and
we'll see.
I mean, it's going to be fine. It'll do great, and people are going to go
next.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Robin, thanks so much for coming by. Thanks for filling in for Timbo. I appreciate it. It's great seeing you.
I love here, so thanks for having me again.
Yep, of course. And then hopefully maybe we'll try to get a live show in LA and you'll have to come.
Ooh, that's kind of fun. That's exciting.
Gotta get my butt back on the West Coast, which that's been sort of the struggle over the last few years.
Well, when it starts
travel back to the West Coast. Yeah, I know. Well, it's already cold here, so I don't know. I'm already dreaming about planning a trip out there. So we'll keep you posted. But thanks again, Robin.
And beautiful here, so
yeah, there you go.
You're always welcome in California.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Well, it's good to see you. Have a great week, and we'll see you again sometime soon.
Okay. Bye. Thanks for having me.